Your soulmate only has 3 days left, open it now to save them. The police arrived. My beloved child. The message arrived with only 7 words that mattered. Your soulmate has 3 days left. Open it now. And before anyone could understand what those words meant, a police car pulled quietly to the curb outside their home. But here is the detail nobody expected: the officers were not there because your soulmate had done something wrong. They were carrying information connected to a report filed days earlier, a report your soulmate never imagined would lead directly back to you. Their hands trembled as one officer placed a sealed envelope on the table and explained that there was a 3-day deadline attached to an important decision. Your soulmate stared at your name printed across one page, and suddenly everything felt different. Don't skip, because the deadline was not what it first appeared to be. Something had been discovered, something that could finally explain why your soulmate had been acting distant, uncertain, and unusually quiet. And when they asked the officer one simple question, "Why is their name here?" the answer changed the entire conversation. The officer pulled out another document, but instead of immediately handing it over, he asked your soulmate whether they recognized an address written near the bottom. They did. That was when their expression changed. It was a place connected to a moment they had tried desperately to forget, not because something terrible happened there, but because it was where they once made a decision that separated them from you. Now that same address had appeared in an official report after someone came forward with information that challenged what your soulmate had believed all along. Stay till the end, because the 3-day countdown suddenly made sense. Your soulmate had exactly 3 days to respond, correct the record, and provide information before the matter was officially closed. And buried inside the paperwork was a statement from someone who had finally admitted that an important piece of the story had been misunderstood. Your soulmate read the statement once. Then twice. Their eyes stopped on a single sentence about you. It revealed that something they had blamed you for may never have been your decision at all. For several seconds, your soulmate could not speak. Every unanswered question between you seemed to rearrange itself at once. The silence. The distance. The conversation that ended too quickly. Even the moment they convinced themselves you no longer cared. The officer explained that nothing dramatic needed to happen. Your soulmate simply had to tell the truth about what they knew before the 3-day deadline expired. But emotionally, that request felt enormous, because telling the truth meant admitting they might have judged you without having the complete story. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate then noticed something attached behind the final page, a copy of a message they had never seen before. It carried an earlier date, your name, and words that proved you had tried to reach them long before everything fell apart. Their voice became quiet as they asked, "Why was this never given to me?" The officer looked toward the sealed envelope still sitting unopened on the table and said the answer might be inside. Your soulmate reached for it, broke the seal, and froze when the first name on the page was someone they knew extremely well. The name inside that envelope changed the atmosphere instantly. Your soulmate recognized it, but what stunned them was not simply who it belonged to. It was why that person had been mentioned in connection with the message you tried to send. According to the document, someone had received information meant for your soulmate and never passed it along. There was no dramatic accusation written across the page, only a timeline of dates, conversations, and details that created an uncomfortable question: had your soulmate spent all this time believing a version of events that was incomplete? The officer carefully explained that they were still reviewing the information, but the 3-day deadline meant your soulmate needed to respond quickly if they wanted their side included before the report was finalized. Don't skip. Your soulmate suddenly remembered one strange conversation from the past, a moment when this same person insisted that you had moved on and wanted nothing more to do with them. Back then, they believed every word. Now they were staring at something suggesting you may have been trying to reach them at that exact time. Then came the detail that made your soulmate sit down. Attached to the paperwork was a record showing when your original message had been received, and the date matched almost perfectly with the day your soulmate finally decided to stop waiting for you. Imagine what that realization did to them. One missing message may have influenced months of silence. One misunderstanding may have changed the direction of everything between you. Stay till the end, because your soulmate was about to discover why the police had become involved in this situation at all. The officer explained that the hidden message surfaced while they were reviewing an unrelated report involving misplaced personal documents. Your name appeared unexpectedly among those records, and once the timeline was compared, they realized your soulmate needed to be contacted. Nobody was claiming every mystery had been solved. But there was now enough information to question what everyone previously assumed. Your soulmate looked toward the clock, remembering those 3 days, and asked whether they could see the original message, not the copied summary, not somebody else's explanation, but your actual words. That request opened another door. The officer placed a protected copy in front of them, and your soulmate began reading slowly. With every sentence, their certainty disappeared. Your message wasn't cold. It wasn't dismissive. It didn't sound like someone walking away. Instead, it showed that you had been trying to clear up a misunderstanding and asking for one honest conversation before assumptions became permanent. Something huge is waiting for you, because near the end was a reference to something only you and your soulmate would understand. A small detail from your shared past that nobody else should have been able to explain for you. That was the moment your soulmate knew the message was genuine. Their eyes returned to the familiar name from the envelope, and one question became impossible to ignore: why would someone close to them allow this misunderstanding to continue? But before they could ask the officer anything else, another page slipped from behind the copy. It contained a handwritten note dated much later than your message, and when your soulmate recognized the handwriting, they realized the person connected to this mystery may have known the truth for far longer than anyone suspected. The handwriting was unmistakable, and your soulmate felt the entire story shift again. This was not a stranger's note or some forgotten piece of paperwork. It belonged to the same person whose name appeared inside the envelope. The person who had once confidently told your soulmate that you wanted distance. But the note suggested something completely different. It mentioned your message, acknowledged that there had been confusion, and included one sentence that made your soulmate read it 3 times. They never received the full explanation. Suddenly, the 3-day deadline felt more important than ever. Don't skip, because your soulmate realized this was no longer about recovering one missing message. It was about discovering how many decisions had been made while both of you were working with incomplete information. The officer remained careful, explaining that the note alone did not answer every question. But then he pointed toward its date. It had been written weeks after your soulmate was told you had stopped trying to reach them. That meant someone may have known there was more to the story while your soulmate was already learning how to live without you. Your soulmate asked for a moment and walked toward the window, trying to connect memories that suddenly looked different. They remembered asking about you. They remembered being told not to wait. They remembered nearly contacting you directly, only to change their mind after hearing one final piece of advice from someone they trusted. Stay till the end, because that final piece of advice was now written almost word for word inside the documents. The similarity was impossible to overlook. Your soulmate returned to the table and asked the officer whether another person had provided these papers. His answer was simple, yes. Someone had recently turned over a folder containing old correspondence and records, believing they might belong to your soulmate. But there was something unusual about the folder. Your message was not the only item connected to you. There were several dated pages showing attempts to clarify what happened, and each one filled another gap in the timeline. Your soulmate had spent so long wondering why you seemed silent. Now the evidence suggested the silence may never have been as simple as they believed. And then the officer revealed why those 3 days mattered so much. After the deadline, the documents would be processed and the current review would move forward based on the information already provided. Your soulmate still had time to add their account, identify what they recognized, and explain the missing pieces. But they needed to decide what they were willing to say. Something huge is waiting for you, because instead of hesitating, your soulmate reached for a blank statement page. They were ready to finally put their version of the story into words. But before writing anything, they asked to see every item connected to your name. The officer opened the folder wider and removed one final sealed piece that had not yet been discussed. On the front was your soulmate's full name. Beneath it was a short handwritten instruction: give this directly to them when they finally know the truth. Your soulmate looked at the officer, then slowly opened it, and the first sentence revealed that someone had been trying to bring the two of you back to the same conversation all along. That first sentence forced your soulmate to reconsider everything they thought they understood. The person behind the sealed note wasn't asking for forgiveness or trying to control what happened next. Instead, they had documented a conversation from months earlier, one your soulmate never knew had taken place. According to the note, you had tried to explain the misunderstanding long before the distance between you became permanent, but your words had traveled through too many people before reaching their destination. Somewhere along that chain, the meaning changed. Don't skip, because your soulmate suddenly remembered hearing a completely different version of that same conversation. What they were told sounded final, almost as if you had deliberately closed the door. Yet the original account said the opposite: you had wanted one direct conversation, without assumptions, and without anyone speaking for either of you. Your soulmate looked across the table and quietly admitted something difficult: they had never actually heard those words from you. They had heard them from someone else. The officer then showed them a timeline assembled from the recovered documents. One date stood out immediately. It was the evening your soulmate had almost contacted you themselves. They had written something, stared at it for several minutes, and ultimately decided not to send it because someone close to them insisted you would not respond. Stay till the end, because the recovered timeline showed that on that very same evening, another message connected to you had been recorded. Two people had apparently been waiting for clarity at almost exactly the same moment, while each believed the other had already chosen silence. Your soulmate covered their mouth in disbelief. Suddenly, this wasn't a story about someone simply walking away. It was a story about timing, assumptions, and conversations that never reached the people who needed them. Then the officer pointed toward another entry. It showed that the person who eventually turned over the folder had tried to correct the misunderstanding later, but stopped after discovering one more piece of information. That missing piece was still inside the folder. Your soulmate watched as the officer removed a small page containing nothing more than a date, a location, and a brief record of a conversation. Something huge is waiting for you, because the location was familiar. Your soulmate had been there before, and so had the person whose name appeared in the first envelope. According to the record, they met there shortly after your message disappeared, and during that meeting something was said about you that influenced everything that followed. Your soulmate immediately asked what those exact words were, but the officer explained that the full account was on the reverse side. For several seconds, your soulmate simply stared at the page, almost afraid of discovering how differently their life might have unfolded if they had known this earlier. Then they turned it over. There was only one paragraph, but halfway through it, your soulmate stopped reading, looked up in complete disbelief, and whispered, "So they knew I still cared." That realization landed harder than anything else in the folder. The paragraph confirmed that someone close to your soulmate had known their feelings for you were never truly gone. They knew your soulmate still wondered about you, still questioned what had happened, and still hoped there might be an explanation for the silence. Yet the same record showed that instead of encouraging a direct conversation, that person had advised them to leave everything alone until they knew more. Don't skip, because the next sentence changed the meaning again. Apparently, they really had been trying to learn more, but while doing so, they relied on second-hand information that turned out to be incomplete. Your soulmate realized this mystery might not have begun with one deliberate decision at all. It may have grown from several people making assumptions, each believing they were protecting someone from disappointment. And now, with only 3 days to correct the official timeline, your soulmate finally had the chance to replace assumptions with their own words. They picked up the blank statement page and started writing. Not about rumors. Not about what someone else claimed you meant. They wrote what they personally remembered. The last conversation with you, the questions they never asked, the message they almost sent, and the moment they decided to believe someone else's interpretation instead of contacting you directly. Stay till the end, because halfway through the statement, the officer interrupted with something unexpected. Another document had just been located among the recovered records, and unlike everything else, this one had been created after the misunderstanding was already well underway. It contained a short account from the person who had originally received your message. Your soulmate expected another confusing explanation. Instead, they found an admission: your message had been held back because that person believed waiting would prevent further confusion. But then came the sentence nobody expected: they later realized their decision had actually made the confusion much worse. Your soulmate lowered the page and asked the question that had been building from the beginning. Why didn't they simply tell me? The officer couldn't answer someone else's personal reasoning, but the document contained one final clue. Something huge is waiting for you, because it mentioned a second sealed message, one written specifically after the person realized their mistake. That message had never been included with the original folder. For a moment, it seemed like another answer had disappeared. Then the officer checked the inventory sheet and noticed a separate item listed under a different reference number. It had arrived earlier that morning and was being held with the remaining documents. Your soulmate immediately asked to see it. Minutes later, another envelope was placed on the table, carrying their name and a date from long after you two stopped speaking. They opened it carefully, expecting an apology or explanation. Instead, the first line said, "There is something you still don't know about the day they tried to reach you." And beneath that sentence was a detail that could finally explain why your message had become so important in the first place. The detail beneath that sentence was a time stamp, one that matched the exact hour your soulmate had been told you were done trying. But the newly recovered account revealed that during that same hour, you had actually asked for your message to be delivered directly because you feared your intentions were being misunderstood. Your soulmate stared at the page, realizing how close the truth had come to reaching them. Don't skip, because the next lines explained why the message never arrived as intended. The person carrying it believed they needed to verify one detail first, so they delayed passing it along. By the time they realized the information they had received was inaccurate, your soulmate had already made a painful decision based on the silence. Nothing about the past could be instantly rewritten, but one truth was becoming impossible to ignore. The ending your soulmate believed had happened between you may never have been the ending you intended. For the first time since the officers arrived, your soulmate stopped reading and asked what would happen if they submitted their statement before the 3-day deadline. The officer explained that their account would become part of the completed record alongside the recovered documents, allowing the timeline to reflect what they personally remembered rather than only what others had reported. Stay till the end, because your soulmate did something nobody in that room expected. Instead of immediately finishing the statement, they asked whether they could correct one sentence they had already written. They crossed out the words, "I believe they chose to disappear," and replaced them with something far more accurate, "I never heard that directly from them." That single correction seemed small, but emotionally it changed everything. Your soulmate was no longer treating an assumption as a fact. And once they recognized that difference, another question became unavoidable: how many other things about you had they accepted without ever hearing your side? That question led them back to the final pages of the folder, where one overlooked entry carried your name beside a reference to a conversation scheduled long ago. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate remembered that day clearly. They had waited for something from you, but nothing ever seemed to arrive. Yet the recovered entry showed that a response had been prepared and logged. Your soulmate immediately asked where it was. The officer searched through the remaining documents, then paused when he noticed that the reference number did not match anything currently on the table. There was one more item still unaccounted for. He stepped away briefly, checked the record again, and returned carrying a thin envelope that looked older than all the others. Your soulmate recognized the date before they even touched it. It was the day everything between you changed. They opened the envelope, unfolded the page inside, and discovered that the message was not addressed to them, it was addressed to you, Rit. Your response was shorter than your soulmate expected, but every line carried the answer they had been searching for. You had not rejected their request for one honest conversation. According to the preserved record, you had agreed to it. You had even suggested a specific day when both of you could finally speak without anyone else interpreting your words. Your soulmate read the date and immediately recognized it. It was the same day they had been told you had changed your mind. Don't skip, because beside your response was a second notation showing that the planned conversation had been cancelled before either of you spoke directly. But the cancellation had not come from you. And it had not come from your soulmate. Someone else had communicated it on their behalf, apparently believing the meeting would only create more confusion. Your soulmate looked at the officer in disbelief. For months, they had remembered that cancelled conversation as the moment you chose to walk away. Now the record suggested neither of you had actually made that choice. With the 3-day deadline still approaching, your soulmate finished their statement differently than they had originally planned. They refused to accuse anyone of motives they couldn't prove. Instead, they documented the facts they personally recognized. They wanted the conversation. Your preserved response showed you wanted it too, and neither of you had directly cancelled it. Stay till the end, because once those facts were placed beside each other, another hidden detail became visible. The officer noticed that the cancellation record contained a reference to a follow-up message sent several hours later. That follow-up was supposed to explain why the conversation had been stopped, but your soulmate had never seen it. A search through the recovered folder revealed that it had been filed behind an unrelated page. When the officer finally unfolded it, your soulmate recognized the first sentence immediately. It contained a phrase you used often enough that there was little doubt whose words had been recorded. Something huge is waiting for you, because the follow-up message showed that you had questioned the cancellation almost immediately. You had asked whether your soulmate personally wanted the conversation called off, and you requested confirmation before accepting that decision. No confirmation from your soulmate appeared anywhere in the records. Instead, there was a final handwritten note saying, "Wait until I can speak with them directly." Your soulmate's expression changed. That sentence meant someone eventually realized the mistake and intended to correct it, but apparently never completed that conversation. Then the officer turned the page over and discovered something neither of them had noticed before. A later entry had been added beneath the original note. It contained a date from only a few days ago, followed by 6 words that made your soulmate forget about everything else on the table. "I finally told them where to look." And beside those words was the name of the person who had delivered the recovered folder to the police. That name connected the final missing pieces in a way your soulmate never expected. The person who delivered the folder wasn't the one who had originally caused the confusion. They were someone who discovered the old documents much later and realized the story everyone remembered did not match what had actually been recorded. Instead of deciding what the papers meant themselves, they brought everything forward so the timeline could finally be examined properly. Don't skip, because your soulmate then learned why this happened now, after so much silence. Only days earlier, the person who had kept those records admitted there was unfinished information connected to you. That admission triggered the search that uncovered the messages, cancelled conversation, and missing explanations. Your soulmate looked at the officer and then at the 3-day deadline. What had seemed frightening at first was actually a limited opportunity to make sure their own account was included before the review was completed. And now they knew exactly what they needed to say. Your soulmate finished their statement carefully. They wrote that they could no longer claim you had deliberately walked away, because the recovered messages showed you had asked for direct confirmation before accepting the cancellation. They admitted that much of what they believed came through other people rather than from you. Stay till the end, because writing those words unlocked another memory. Your soulmate suddenly remembered keeping something from that period too, a small note they had written after the cancelled conversation. They had never sent it. They had placed it somewhere private and eventually forgotten about it. But they remembered one line perfectly. If I ever learn there was more to this story, I want to hear it from them. The officer couldn't tell them what to do with that personal realization, but your soulmate didn't need advice. For the first time, they understood that the question haunting them all these months might finally have an answer. Then came one last surprise from the folder. Something huge is waiting for you, because beneath the inventory sheet was a recent statement from the person who had originally spoken on behalf of both of you. It wasn't an excuse. It simply acknowledged that they had made assumptions, passed along incomplete information, and eventually understood that neither you nor your soulmate had been given the full picture. Your soulmate read the final sentence silently, then read it again. It said the only fair thing left was for both people to receive the information that should have reached them from the beginning. The officer gathered the completed pages and confirmed that your soulmate's statement would be added before the deadline. But as he prepared to leave, he handed your soulmate one remaining sealed copy. Across the front were two names written side by side, yours and theirs. And underneath was a simple instruction. To be opened only after both sides of the story have been recorded. For the first time that day, your soulmate hesitated before touching the envelope. Everything else had explained the past, but this felt different. Your name and theirs were written together because the document inside had been prepared only after both timelines were compared. Your soulmate slowly opened it and found a simple summary of the recovered communications. Don't skip, because one detail immediately stood out. There had never been a direct message from either of you saying the connection was permanently over. Every supposed ending had passed through another person, another interpretation, or an unanswered assumption. Your soulmate read that finding twice. Then came an even more surprising entry. On the morning after the cancelled conversation, both of you had separately asked almost the same question, whether the other person had personally chosen to stop talking. Neither question had ever reached its intended recipient. Months of uncertainty had grown from two unanswered questions that were nearly identical. Your soulmate sat quietly as the meaning settled in. They had spent so long believing they were the only one left wondering what happened, yet the record suggested you had been searching for clarity too. Stay till the end, because the envelope contained something beyond the timeline. A final statement written by the person who had eventually admitted the communication had been mishandled. They explained that once they discovered both sides had asked for direct confirmation, they realized they should never have assumed they understood what either of you wanted. Your soulmate wasn't interested in turning the moment into blame. What mattered now was that the missing information had finally surfaced. They looked toward the officer and asked whether completing the statement meant the matter was finished. He explained that their portion would be complete once the documents were verified and recorded. The 3-day window wasn't a countdown toward something frightening. It was simply the remaining period for your soulmate to make sure their account was accurate. But one question still remained, and your soulmate knew paperwork couldn't answer it. What would happen when you finally learned what they had discovered? Something huge is waiting for you, because tucked behind the summary was a copy marked for you, the same timeline your soulmate had just read. For the first time, both of you could potentially see the same facts without anyone standing between your words. Your soulmate stared at your name and whispered that if you ever saw those pages, you would finally understand why they disappeared into silence. Then the officer noticed a final line printed beneath the reference number. It indicated that one additional personal document had been voluntarily submitted with the recovered records, but it wasn't part of the official timeline. Your soulmate asked who had written it. The officer checked the name, paused, and turned the page toward them. Your soulmate's eyes widened, because the document had been written recently. And the signature at the bottom belonged to someone they never expected to hear from again. The signature belonged to the person who had first encouraged your soulmate to stop waiting for you, and this time there was no second-hand explanation standing between their words and the truth. The document was personal, direct, and surprisingly simple. They admitted that they had interpreted incomplete information as certainty and passed that interpretation along as though it were fact. But then your soulmate reached the sentence that mattered most: should have let them speak to each other. Don't skip, because those words answered the question that had been hanging over every recovered message. Nobody could change the months that followed, but the silence between you was no longer proof that either person had stopped caring. Your soulmate looked at the original 3-day notice again and finally understood what this entire moment represented. It wasn't about rescuing someone from some mysterious fate. It was about saving the truth from being permanently buried beneath assumptions before the record closed. Then the officer revealed one final procedural detail. Once your soulmate's statement was verified, the recovered timeline could be completed, and the copy connected to your name would reflect the same information. For perhaps the first time since everything went wrong, both sides would have access to the same sequence of events. Stay till the end, because your soulmate made one important addition before signing their statement. At the bottom, they wrote that if an opportunity for direct communication ever appeared, they wanted no intermediary speaking for them again. Their words would be their own. Your words would be yours. Whatever happened afterward would finally be based on reality instead of interpretation. The officer accepted the completed pages, but before closing the folder, he noticed that the recent personal statement contained a reference to one more item, a message your soulmate had apparently written months ago but never delivered. Your soulmate immediately recognized what it meant. Something huge is waiting for you, because that forgotten message was the note your soulmate remembered earlier. The one they wrote after the cancelled conversation when they were still hoping there might be another explanation. They had believed it was lost forever. Instead, a copy had been preserved among the records. The officer handed it over, and your soulmate read their younger words with an expression that slowly changed from surprise to disbelief. The message didn't contain anger or a goodbye. It contained one unanswered question meant specifically for you. If this wasn't your choice, tell me what really happened. Your soulmate stared at that sentence for a long moment. After everything uncovered today, the answer finally seemed closer than it had ever been. But beneath their old message was something they had never seen before, a handwritten response added later. And when your soulmate read the first few words, they realized someone had answered that question long before the police ever arrived. The handwritten response was only a few lines long. yet it carried the clarity your soulmate had been missing for months. It explained that the separation had never begun with one clear decision from either of you. Instead, several incomplete messages had crossed paths until both sides believed the other had chosen distance. Your soulmate read the response slowly, then noticed something unusual beside the final sentence, a date proving it had been written shortly after their forgotten question. Don't skip, because that meant the truth had existed somewhere all along. It simply had not reached the person who needed it. Your soulmate looked toward the officer and asked who had written the response. He checked the record carefully and explained that it came from someone who had witnessed part of the original confusion and later tried to correct the timeline. But there was another detail. The response referenced a conversation involving you that had never appeared anywhere else in the recovered documents. Your soulmate immediately asked to see that reference. The officer turned several pages until he found a short entry describing a conversation from the week everything changed. Stay till the end, because this was the first account showing what you had reportedly said after learning the planned conversation was cancelled. According to the record, you didn't respond with indifference. You asked whether your soulmate had personally made that decision, and when nobody could confirm it, you refused to assume what they felt. That single detail made your soulmate fall silent. For months, they had believed you accepted the distance without questioning it. Now they were reading evidence that you had questioned the very thing they questioned too. Two people had been asking for the same confirmation while neither received an answer. Your soulmate looked down at their completed statement and realized there was one more correction they needed to make before the 3-day window closed. They added a final sentence: I cannot say they abandoned the conversation, because I never heard that from them directly. Something huge is waiting for you, because immediately after signing beneath those words, your soulmate noticed a small reference code beside the newly discovered conversation. The officer searched the inventory and found that the code belonged to a separate sealed record recovered with the original folder. Unlike everything else, it wasn't written by the person who had passed messages between you. It was a direct account from someone who had actually been present on the day the misunderstanding began. Your soulmate leaned forward as the officer opened it. The first few lines confirmed the date and location they already knew. But halfway down the page appeared a sentence neither of you had ever heard before. The witness claimed that immediately after the confusion started, someone had tried to bring you and your soulmate into the same room to clear everything up. And the reason that meeting never happened was finally written on the next page.